All right, guys, what's going on? Another video today, this time about the patterns of evolution. So in previous videos, we've talked about evolution by natural selection. We've also talked about the evidence for evolution. Today, we're focusing on really the patterns that we observe in evolution. We're going to talk about 5. We're going to talk about convergent evolution, divergent evolution, coevolution, punctuated equilibrium, and even gradualism. Yep, that's right, even gradualism. All right, so before we begin jumping into these different patterns, I do want to differentiate between micro evolution and macro evolution. So micro means small, macro means big. So microevolution, the wordy definition for this would be the changes in the allele frequency within a gene pool, but that really just means what causes variation within one single population of organisms. Versus macroevolution, remember macro is big, macro, we're talking about at the species level or above the species level, right? So we're talking about speciation, creation of new species, or the evolution of groups of organisms, like the evolution of all mammals or the evolution of all reptiles, right? So that's macroevolution. A lot of the patterns we're going to talk about today are really focusing on macroevolution because we're talking about speciation and change in species today. All right, so with that out of the way, let's jump into it and talk about our first pattern called convergent evolution. All right, so what convergent evolution is, it's kind of cool. It's two separate species that are not related end up converging, meaning they come together to in their evolutionary paths, right? So great examples of this are analogous structures. So this should hopefully be a little bit of review. Let's do the definition and I'll give you some examples to kind of clarify this. So convergent evolution, okay? It's evolution towards similar characteristics in unrelated species. Whew. Unrelated species. So evolution towards similar characteristics in unrelated species, right? They're not that closely related. So this is great examples of convergent evolution would be analogous structures. So in a previous video, I talked about a butterfly's wing as well as a bird's wing, right? Very different looking in structure, but they both have the same function. Those are analogous structures. But convergent evolution is more or less the same thing. So I'm going to give you a new example today. Today my example is going to be, example EX, it's going to be the tail fin of a shark versus a whale. Whoa, shark versus a whale. Both in the ocean, both have these large tails that help them propel and move through the water, right? But they're not very related. A shark is way closely related to, sharks are in the family of rays, so like bat rays, manta rays, all those things are closely related to sharks, but whales are actually more closely related to us because we're talking about homologous structures, right? Whales are mammals, so they're part of the mammal family, all right? So I'm gonna do a quick drawing to help kind of show you guys what this looks like. So here's my best impression or drawing of a shark tail. Here's my shark, right? And then, I don't know if you see that shark. So notice here it's got a big, I forgot the dorsal fin. All right, so definitely gotta include that. That's my shark. Now I'm gonna draw a whale. So a whale looks more, here we're going from the top view. I don't know. Here's a whale. Whoop, whoop. Give it some flippers. Give it a smiley face. Right, there's my whale. All right, so what you notice here is they're both in the same environment, right? But they converge in their evolution. They're not related, but they both kind of ended up looking a little similar because they live in the same environment. So a shark's tail helps it move this way, like propels it through the water like this, versus a whale's tail goes up and down, right? So they're both tails. They both evolved to help them move through the water, but they're not that closely related, right? That's pattern number 1, convergent evolution. So what that would look like if this is we'll kind of graph this to make it visual. So if this is time and we have 2 different species, so here's parent species number 1, here's parent species number 2, what convergent evolution means, remember, that's when 2 arrows or 2 species are converging, meaning they're coming together. So over time, right, here's time on the y-axis, over time, parent species number 1 is not very related to parent species number 2, but over time, they're going to get closer and closer in appearance as they evolve because they're evolving in similar environments, right? So that's convergent evolution. Whoa, almost fell over. Okay. Number 2, so that's convergent evolution. Now let's compare that to divergent evolution. So rather than coming together, that means separating. They're diverting. They're going in different directions, okay? So what divergent evolution is, I'm doing red here. Divergent evolution is when closely related species evolve in different directions. Whoa. When closely related species diverge or separate in their evolution, right? So homologous structure is kind of similar to this. So we talked about a whale's fin, right? And a human arm has the same bones. So we're related, come from a common ancestor, but we diverged. We went on different paths in our evolutionary history because we're adapting to different environments, okay? So adapting to similar environments, adapting to different environments, coming together, right? These are diverging, going apart. So my example for this one today is going to be the red fox, which lives in the forest, and a kit fox, which lives in the desert. So I'm going to try my best to do some drawings here. I know my drawings aren't the best, but I'm trying to make it visual for you guys. So my example today for divergent evolution, EX for example, is the red fox and I'll say versus the kit fox, right? So they're both species of fox, but they look pretty different from each other. That's because they were adapted to different environments. So the red fox lives in more of the forest, woodlands kind of ecosystem, versus the kit fox lives in the desert. So a red fox is much bigger. So here's my red fox. It's much bigger in size, right? And it lives in like a forest or woodlands kind of ecosystem. So here's your red fox. Versus a kit fox, still a species of fox, right? So they're closely related, had a common ancestor, but they diverged, go in different directions in their evolution. A kit fox has these really big ears, whoop, 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 right? And it's really, really small. It's really, really small compared to a red fox, right? So a kit fox actually lives in the desert. So here's my desert ecosystem, whoop, 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 where it's really, really hot. And the reason the kit fox has such big ears is because those ears actually help it cool it down in this desert ecosystem, which is crazy. Red fox is red, right, with the name. Kit fox is actually like a sandyish color because it helps it blend in with the desert ecosystem, right? So two closely related species that end up diverging, looking different, right? So let's graph this, make it visual. So before we graph this, we said convergent evolution means come together. So divergent evolution, this time we don't have two different parent species. This time we have the same parent, common ancestor. They come from the same place, right? But they're going to diverge. So they're going to come up and they're going to diverge. One species is going to go this way. Here's the kit fox adapting to the forest ecosystem. And here goes the red fox. I don't know if I said red fox or kit fox. Here goes the red fox adapting to the forest ecosystem. And here comes the kit fox, which is adapting to the desert ecosystem, right? Closely related, boom, diverge in their evolution, right? So those are the first two patterns. We got three more. Let's flip the board. Whoop. Talk about coevolution. Coevolution is pretty cool. It's one of my favorite patterns in evolution because coevolution is when two species are evolving in response to the other species, which is crazy, all right? So let's write the definition. I'll give you an example. Coevolution is when two or more species evolve in response to changes in the other. Whoa, what does that mean? That's kind of cool. So two different species are evolving together in response, in relation to how the other ones have changed and are evolving. So this is my example. So I'm going to write EX for example. I already got some drawings up here. A great example of coevolution would be the murex snail and a species of crab. So what happened was we had the crab who preys upon this snail, right? It has to break open that shell to really get all the good stuff and eat this snail. So it's got these claws, right? That's what crabs have. They got the claws. They break open the snail and eat it, right? But what happened was, over time, this snail began to evolve, right? It's like, you know, of course, okay, I got to clarify this. A snail can't decide and be like, oh, we need to evolve. Remember, mutations are random. Sometimes they're beneficial, sometimes they're not. But mutations happen that allowed this snail to start to grow kind of spikes on its shell. And those spikes were helpful, right, for the population of snail because it prevented this crab from eating it. But what's so crazy, what's so phenomenal is that this crab population wasn't just hanging around and their food was like going to be gone. They, as a population, also started to evolve, which is crazy because they can't just decide it. It had to be a random mutation, which did happen. It also helped them continue to eat the snail. So what happened here, the snails started to get spikes, but these crabs got one claw that started to get bigger every time. It started to grow in size and became stronger. So this crab evolved this way. This murex snail evolved this way, right? And then again, it continued to happen. The snail population continued to evolve to have even bigger spikes as defense, and the crab continued to evolve. The population of crab continued to evolve to get even bigger, stronger jaws to eat these snails. That's crazy, right? That is crazy how they're evolving together. They call this an evolutionary arms race, right? Two species that are evolving in a competitive fashion in response to each other. So two or more species evolve in response to changes in the other. Coevolution. But something to clarify is coevolution doesn't always have to be like this competitive in nature, right? It can also be different. So another example would be the acacia tree and the stinging ant, right? So the acacia tree has these really hollow thorns on all of its branches where these ants actually live inside, and the ants eat the nectar. So it's beneficial for the ants to live inside these thorns of the acacia tree. And the acacia tree really like these ants because the ants, even though it has thorns, some caterpillars and insects can still get into those thorns and eat the leaves of the tree. So these ants actually sting those caterpillars and all these insects that are coming. So together, they're evolving together. These ants, recent ancestors, don't have the stinging ability, right? But these species of ants that live on these acacia trees actually developed the ability to sting because they're evolving with the plant. Like, I don't know, phenomenal, okay? So that's coevolution. We're gonna talk about two more. We're gonna talk about punctuated equilibrium and gradualism. These two are kind of tough for a lot of students to understand and wrap their heads around, so I can do my best to explain it. Let's do it on this board. I'll just erase everything. Give me a sec. So coevolution is out of here. That one's pretty cool. So we're talking about convergent evolution. We're talking about divergent evolution. We've talked about coevolution. And now we're going to talk about gradualism. Gradualism. Right, that's number 4. Whoop, 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 whoop. And let's do a different color. Let's do red for number 5, which is punctuated equilibrium. Whoa, punctuated equilibrium. What does that mean? All right, we'll get there. Let's start with gradualism first, though, okay? So these are two kind of competing theories or ideas of how the rate or the speed of speciation, how quickly species show up, right? So gradualism was really kind of what Darwin thought. He thought species kind of change gradually, really slowly over time. So gradual, we see gradual, which means like slowly over time, versus punctuated equilibrium means species happen really, really quick, right? This was come up in 1972 by a guy, Stephen Gould, who was actually a paleontologist. He was looking at the fossil record, and he came up with this new kind of theory that kind of competes with gradualism. Some people think they're separate. Some people think they can work together. But let's talk about what both of them mean. So let's start with gradualism. Gradualism is that the evolution of new species, right, happens gradually. By gradual accumulation of small changes over long periods of time. All right, so that was a long definition, right? Evolution of new species by gradual, so slow accumulation, which means like building up, slow build up of small changes over really long periods of time. Gradualism, right? So that's what Darwin thought. So if we were to graph gradualism to make it visual, let's do a graph. Here's my y-axis, here's my x-axis. On the y-axis, we're going to put evolution, right, or change. So we put evolution this way. Evolution. On the x-axis, we're going to put time, right? And how gradualism kind of works, right? These slow, gradual changes over long periods of time is maybe we have a species. Let's start here. We're going to do maybe tigers as our example today. So maybe a long time ago, there were tigers without any stripes, right? And then we knew there's a species today that has stripes. So what gradualism says, how that tiger population got from no stripes to having stripes was slow, was gradual. So maybe it was species number 1, right? Slow, there was like maybe some variation in colors. Maybe there's some orange tigers and some darker color oranges. And then gradually over time, that species started to accumulate mutations that started to gradually kind of turn into another species. Let's go green, I don't know. Another species that started to kind of turn into like the beginnings of stripes. We started to see some stripes start to develop, right? So this is a new species, started to gradually change, and those stripes eventually became so defined that we now have the tigers that we have today. So let's not do black because use that for the graph. Have new stripes that have the stripes today, right? So it's a slow, gradual change over time. So this was species 3. Right? Maybe this was species number 2. Maybe this was, species numero 1. Okay? So slow, gradual changes to new species, right? That's what Darwin thought. But like I said, in 1972, this paleontologist, Stephen Gould, came up with this new idea of punctuated equilibrium. So what punctuated equilibrium is, he didn't think it was the slow gradual change over time, right? He thought it was really fast. Boom, rapid changes. These really rapid changes caused by really extreme changes in the environment. So you didn't see one species slowly changing another. You saw periods of stasis, which means no change. Boom, change in the environment, brand new species. Boom, change in the environment, brand new species, right? So let's write down the definition. I'll kind of give you an example with those tigers again. So we're going black. So punctuated equilibrium is the rapid evolution of species that follows long, stable periods of no genetic change. So rapid, which means fast, rapid evolution of species. So rapid, real quick, rapid evolution of species followed by periods of little to no genetic change. Okay? Rapid evolution of species followed by no periods of change, right? Stasis. So if we were to graph this one, again, let's take out a graph. Again, we've got our y-axis, whoop, our x-axis, yeet. We're going to put evolution here. Evolution. We're going to put time on the x. And let's see what this looks like in a graph. So what punctuated equilibrium says is we got species number 1. Here's species number 1. So maybe this is tigers, remember, without those stripes, hanging out. And then, boom, there's a change in the environment. Something crazy happened. Maybe we're talking about that moth example in the previous video. Maybe it's the Industrial Revolution. Something really extreme in the environment changed. And then a new species of, so species number 2 shows up. Maybe this is now the tigers with the stripes, right? And they're just going to hang out and not really change for a long period of time, right? So maybe that's what the tigers are like right now. And maybe there's going to be a big catastrophic change in their environment someday. That's going to change, boom, a punctuated period right? Punctuated period. And then species number 3 is going to show up, whatever the tiger is going to look like in the future. And they're going to be this long period of no change, right? So we had species 3 potentially. We had species 2, and then we had species number 1, right? So you see the difference between these two? These are really comparing the rate of evolution. So gradualism says slow accumulation of changes over time, versus punctuated equilibrium says hanging out, everything's staying the same. It's equilibrium, which means equal, means stable. Everything's stable, period of stasis, no change. And then boom, change in the environment, brand new species, right? So maybe no stripes, now we have stripes. Rather than, oh, a little bit of change to the stripes, coloration gets a little bit more defined, and now we kind of have tigers with stripes. Nope, this is saying, no stripes, change in the environment real quick, punctuated, there's a punctuation period, boom, that causes a brand new species, right? Punctuated equilibrium versus gradualism, right? So as a recap, we talked about five different patterns in evolution. We talked about convergent evolution, when 2 unrelated species converge. We talked about divergent evolution, when 2 species that came from a common ancestor go in their separate directions. Then we talked about coevolution, when 2 or more organisms or populations evolve in response to each other, like the crab and the murex snail. And then finally, we talked about gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium, where we're comparing the speed or the rate of change or speciation. Maybe it's really gradual and slow. Or maybe it's like no change, boom, really fast change, no change, boom, really fast change, no change. A great example of this is the horseshoe crab. That organism is so ancient, it was around, I think, during the time of the dinosaurs. It hasn't really changed in a long period of time, right? So it hasn't really evolved. So they're thinking maybe the horseshoe crab right now still is in a period of stasis. It hasn't really evolved or changed much after millions and millions and millions of years, right? So I hope that was helpful. I hope that clarified some things. Remember, guys, work hard, get smart, and I'll see you guys next time.